Thank you very, very much for the invitation. This evening, I'd like to talk about two small projects. I think we'd like to sort of talk up the idea of small-scale incremental change in terms of Melbourne's culture of incrementalism. Although it is true that both of these projects emerge from this larger master planning project, which Claire has handsomely described. This is the revised master plan, or the new master plan for Victoria Harbour that was prepared by our joint venture office, Aspect Oculus, from 2010, in collaboration with Lendlease and Studio Nield. So the first two projects from this work have just recently been completed, and I'd just briefly like to talk about them this evening. One is V5, the Water Plaza, which is an augmentation of an existing structure which was delivered as part of the previous work on the site, and the other is a play space adjacent to a building called C2 or Serrata, which is to the north of Victoria Green. So these projects emerge out of this master plan, and for us it's a really interesting time to be working in Docklands, because for the first time in living memory, Docklands isn't about the creation of new things on a tabula rasa. A lot of the work that is involved in this master plan is in fact the revision or the augmentation of existing spaces and buildings that have been delivered. And in that sense it raises a number of interesting questions. What does it mean to be part of the second decade of Docklands? How should we augment these existing spaces? And what does it mean to work in Docklands in this new paradigm where not everything is brand new? And in order to sort of unpack some of those questions, I wanted to talk to, literally talk to this fellow. This is Richard Sennett, a sociologist and writer of writers on the city, someone who's lionised and has been canonised in our office. In his book, The Craftsman, which is a really amazing book, he talks about the social value of repair in a broad sense, but in a specific sense about the city. And this notion of repair is interesting, I think, in phrasing or positioning the two projects that I'm about to discuss. For Sennett, he makes a distinction between two forms of repair. One is a static repair, a little bit like changing a light bulb, where a defective part is replaced, and then you keep moving on. Contrasting to that, there's this idea of a dynamic repair, where the repair itself emphatically changes the physical configuration of the thing that's being repaired, and then in a sense the nature of the problem is implicit in the repair, i.e. What is being fixed is there for all to see. And this idea of dynamic repair, it's not a main theme, but it certainly pops up in some of the Oculus Studios work. This is the work we did at Franklin Wharf, where the main, this is in Hobart, where the main wharf structure itself is left absolutely intact, and there are a series of interventions which allow public occupation and public occupation of this wharf for the first time and allow access to the water. This is a small part of the Mona project, where the opportunity to repair the interface between a crumbling sandstone and cliff and the huge retaining wall which houses the museum. There was an opportunity for a sort of opportunistic hanging garden that is curated with a series of plants which have a kind of allegorical connection to death, which is one of the underlying themes of the museum. And a project that's currently under development in Ballarat, where the intersection of a new road over the Avenue of Honour, commemorating World War I, is the opportunity to augment the avenue itself with a new garden which takes as its point of departure the poppy fields of Flanders. So moving very briefly on to C2, this is an image of the site as it existed when the new master plan work had started. As part of the previous work by other consultants, the Central Park, Victoria Green, was constructed with a kind of loose fit around its edges, and the idea was that buildings would be constructed around that, the edge of that park, and it would activate the park in the future. The new master plan proposed a series of buildings of varying footprint sizes around that park. This one here was C2. This is an early sketch of the ground floor of C2. We worked with Hayball architects in developing quite an anomaly, a building that is an anomaly in Docklands, hopefully a new kind of anomaly. This building is surrounded on all four sides by public space, and it works incredibly hard to try and activate every linear metre of that building as it hits the ground with a series of different devices, SOHO, offices that hit the ground, different apartments, new ways of, actual ways of entering apartments from laneway spaces, etc. The thing that I'm going to talk about tonight is this area to the south, adjacent to the green. As part of the master plan, it was imagined that this whole interface of Victoria Green might be reactivated and opened up. We worked with the City of Melbourne quite closely to determine the program for the activation, which was a play space. The city determined that a play space that looked at a kind of constructive, active play for children 0 to 5 would be an appropriate gesture. The site itself has a peculiar dimension. It's quite long, incredibly shallow, and is against the timber podium of the C2 building. So this is the podium which conceals a car park which is half in, half out of the ground, a cafe at this end here. We worked on a series of physical study models that looked at what the language of that play experience might be. That was sort of tested with the limited inclusion of small children. And we came up with this idea that we could actually fold a language that took the ground plane up onto this timber deck and create a kind of knuckle between a vertical and a horizontal condition. So the idea, this image here has quite a lot of verbs. The idea was that this language is something that could be occupiable, climbable. It had sand pits. It had quite a lot of things that you could physically do. So if we look at it in plan, it's made up of a series of layers. There's a topographic play surface. There's sand play happening at the bottom. There are a discrete number of off-the-shelf play items embedded within the overall thing, but in a way that they don't kind of overtake the experience, and there's an edge condition which allows for drawing, sitting, pram parking, baby change, those sorts of things. This is an image of the construction beginning, so here you can see the C2 tower at the back. More images of fabrication, and then this is an image of the play space as it's recently been finished. So here is the idea of the C2 tower behind the car park cafe, which is yet to open, this playable surface, and Victoria Green as it exists. So the play space has a kind of dual role of, well, there's a number of things to do within the play space. There's a drinking fountain here, which is obviously for drinking or for drinking, watering your dog. But that water can also pools on a large bench, which is an opportunity to make mud pies and do those sorts of things. The water drips down a series of spitters on the side of this large plinth into the sand, and that becomes an opportunity to build things. You can run around this thing, you can dig, you can play with the sand. The arrangement of the planes and the heights and the angles are a kind of invitation for bold young men like this to see how far they can get up, or for more tentative young ladies like this to test their mettle. And there are a whole series of spaces and routes and sort of hidden things behind the actual skin adjacent to the building. And here it is. Surfaces for drawing. So I guess a project like this, even in all its modesty, tries to do a couple of things that I think are probably new for Docklands and in some sense bend some Docklands rules. I think the first thing here is that the language of this intervention, this augmentation, is deliberately unfinished. It's meant to look like it's a work in progress. It's meant to look a little bit rough around the edges, and it's meant to look like it's a work in flux. And that contrasts nicely to the degree of finish around it. The second thing is that it creates a deliberate ambiguity about where one surface or one property ends and the other begins. The property boundary is actually in here somewhere against this timber cladding, but because this is sort of directly adjacent to the building and because there are a series of layers and edges through here, it's not clear where one property begins and the other ends, so there's a greater sense of a kind of shared or common realm. And the third thing, which happens very rarely, is that this thing has been allowed to sucker itself and actually attack, in a sense, the building. there's not the polite sort of setback that you usually get in Docklands, where there's the building, then there's a trafficable area, and then there is landscape. The second project is this area here, which again, was delivered as part of the previous work on Victoria Harbour. It's immediately to the north of Bordel's Dock 5 building. And what was provided previously was a large plinth for a building that was planned, but as yet has not been delivered, and probably will be in the future. So in the interim, we were briefed to look at a temporary intervention on this space that would allow an occupation that currently doesn't happen. We also had to address this 15-metre setback against the wharf, where nothing much can happen at all. Here's a picture of the orange plinth. The first inclination was to try and occupy that with an active use. And then we came across this idea of trying to invent a singular object which took all the ideas that we needed to accommodate onto this site, planting, furniture, the amenity of shelter and shade, and invest it all into a singular object. That design developed to become a kind of gigantic arbour structure that was embedded in a large raised planter. What was interesting here was that this large planter, was kind of on a mammoth scale, allowed the program, barbecues, chaises, tables, seating and those sorts of things, to actually be pushed into it as if it was one big lump of chewing gum, so that instead of sitting at the edge, which is sort of a sort of Docklands trope, you could be surrounded and enveloped by a space. Here's some images of the study model, more images. This is some of the construction images of that furniture, which was designed as a sort of foil to the lighter municipal benches, which are the Docklands standard. This is an image of the deck and singular object being constructed. And slightly to its left is an image of the elements which sort of fill in that 15-metre setback along the wharf edge. These were literally imagined to be kind of gigantic picnic rugs, which happen to be made out of turf. They provide the opportunity for seating, occupation on this surface. You can move through to get to the retail edge, etc., but they descale what is quite a monumental setback from the water's edge. Part of the delivery of the project was the continuation of the peppercorn trees along the waterfront edge. And this is an image of the space as it's recently been finished and constructed. So here is this idea, and these are very sort of early images of juvenile plants, but these plants will get quite a lot of elevation. So this idea that you actually sit in a kind of alcove or a carved space, you're surrounded by elevation, you're surrounded by plants as a foil to the wind, but also as a place to be. There's nothing that explicitly programmed, there's no explicit program in this space, you don't have to pay to be there, it's just there. There's tables, barbecues, running water, all of those sorts of things. There's a kind of deck that affords a kind of occupation that currently the site doesn't allow. And I guess, again, in its modest way, in a small-scale way, and in an incremental way, this project begins to bend a few of the Docklands rules or patterns. One is that it provides spaces that, it provides an opportunity to occupy a space rather than an edge. You're not always sitting against the water in Docklands, you can actually sit and be surrounded by something. One is a kind of language study again, that this actually has been designed to look as temporary as it needs to be. The pergola isn't a kind of monumental structure, it's a series of trestles that can be literally taken down when the building is finally completed to occupy this space, and all these components can be redeployed elsewhere in Victoria Harbour. And here are some images of children who look suspiciously like the children in the first series of images, occupying that turf edge. And I think also the other idea, for the first time ever in Victoria Harbour, we're allowed to have a palimpsest where our new thing sits directly on top of the old thing and doesn't seek to erase it. Tim has asked us to look at our favourite building. My favourite building is this colourful number. that is to say this colourful number. When I first arrived here from Sydney, this thing felt like the most eccentric and wonderful piece of public furnishing I've ever seen in my life. And I still find it kind of an endearing thing to think about. I have no idea who designed it, which I think is really wonderful. And I think that it's such a hyper-functional object, but at the same time has an incredible elegance, and it's very beautiful. The kindness of being able to, on one side, tell a driver where to go, but on the other side, I think this is incredibly admirable. But I guess the real reason for for sort of selecting something like this as a favourite is that they are increasingly an endangered species. They seem to be disappearing. And if we are to live in a kind of global design city, whatever that might be, where extraordinary things are everywhere, it's these kind of anonymous, eccentric and ordinary things that I think will make cities endearing places to be. Thanks.